My name is Eric Vargas, and today I will be presenting our project on the Charleston Sofa Superstore fire that took place in 2009. My group mates were Grant Golding and Kobe Schmidt. On June 18th, 2007, 9 career firefighters died when they became disoriented and suffocated in rapidly deteriorating conditions inside a burning commercial furniture showroom and warehouse called the Sofa Superstore in South Carolina. The first arriving engine company found a rapidly growing fire at the enclosed loading dock near the back connecting the showroom to the warehouse. It was found right over here. The assistant chief entered the main showroom entrance at the front of the structure, but there were no signs of a fire or even smoke, and the fire couldn't be found in the main showroom. When they finally did find the fire in the building, it was found the door connecting the rear of the right showroom to the warehouse, to the loading dock in between the warehouse. Within minutes, the fire quickly spread into and above the main showroom and even the warehouse. It was fully engulfed in flames, and the fire overwhelmed the firefighters in charge of interior attack, and the interior crews got lost and became confused when thick black smoke from the fire filled the showrooms from ceiling to floor, and they couldn't find their way out. And the interior firefighters realized they were in a lot of trouble and immediately radioed for assistance as the heat just got worse, and one of the firefighters even activated their radio's emergency button. And the front showroom windows were broken through eventually, and the firefighters, including a crew from a mutual aid department, were told to go in to search for the missing firefighters that couldn't find their way out. However, soon after, the flammable mixture of combustion byproducts ignited from and the fire instantly sped through the main showroom, and the interior firefighters that had initially called for help were caught in the fast fire progression, and 9 firefighters from the first on-scene fire department were killed. On top of that, 9 other firefighters, including 2 of the mutual aid firefighters that were told to go help them, they narrowly escaped with serious injury. After the incident took place, there was an investigation, and based on the review of the training and standard operating procedures for that specific fire department that responded, it was discovered that the firefighters and officers at this department were not trained to communicate interior conditions to the outside firefighters. And it was also found that firefighters and officers who had operated inside of the structure who made it out, they reported signs of deteriorating conditions to the investigators. However, they didn't make this clear to the firefighters outside the building while the incident was actually taking place. And there were some verbal exchanges between the attack crews and the chief officers outside, but this information wasn't enough to impact the tactics being used. It could have impacted the tactics if they had properly reported to the outside crews the conditions, how bad they were inside, and it could have changed the tactics from a faster offensive attack to a more cautious defensive operation that could have saved those 9 firefighters. And in this incident, it was found also that there was never a stationary command post that was set up, and so there were a bunch of separate uncoordinated activities that were uncoordinated. They weren't communicating with each other, and they were taking place in multiple locations around the facility. And overall, this led to a poor scene size up, and they didn't properly evaluate the risk of the situation around them and the proper fire hazards and the excessive fuel loads that were inside. And all these indicators could have prompted, again, a switch from offensive to a defensive mindset that could have saved those 9 firefighters. And the fire department, they didn't attempt to coordinate ventilation at all. This is our next point. There was no attempt to coordinate any ventilation of the building. And they did report there was a bunch of thick gray and black smoke that was making it hard to breathe and reducing the visibility so they couldn't see, but they didn't attempt any ventilation techniques. There were no ventilation techniques, and these techniques, such as cutting holes in the roof, may have helped to reduce the accumulation of smoke and hot gases inside the showroom. And they could have used positive pressure fans at the front entrance or at windows or even through the back to vent out the bad air. And that could have helped reduce the amount of smoke, and it could have given it more visibility and again could have saved the firefighters, and maybe they could have made their way out. They could have found a way out. And the firefighters were not properly trained on the properties and extreme behavior of large fires, and a part of that wildfire behavior is the formation of soot, and how soot, whenever there's large enough fire, can coagulate and create larger aerosol particles, which increase the radiative heat transfer between objects. And 80% of the thermal radiation from a fire, especially a fire that big, comes from soot alone. The soot creates thicker, blacker smoke, making it harder to see and obviously more difficult to breathe. The firefighters also should have taken the upholstery of all the furniture into account when doing a size up of the building, because the upholstery tends to be made of a synthetic polymer which can catch fire more easily, burn more rapidly, and create more soot. And the environment, like I mentioned already, played a huge role in the fire because it was out of a furniture store where all the furniture was made up of mostly synthetic polymer upholstery, which is very flammable, which can cause the fire to grow faster and stronger, harder to put out. There was also reportedly trash collected in the loading dock over here, which didn't help the fuel load and made the fuel load even worse and the fire burned even faster. And there were tons of combustible, flammable gases because of the furniture burning inside the store, which was emitting more toxic fumes that quickly filled the building. And due to the furniture again being mainly made of substances like polyester, the smoke was darker and thicker. It was being produced more rapidly, and tons of soot which was being created, which helped the fire spread even faster and created toxins such as carbon and carbon dioxide and other poisonous gases. Plus the wood as part of that furniture also helped in creating carbon and carbon dioxide and just terrible toxins and smoke that entered their lungs and eventually suffocated the firefighters that were killed. And there were already high fuel loads with the surplus of mattresses and sofas in the building. The broken windows provided a rush of air when the firefighters broke out the windows. That spread the fire even faster throughout the building. The building lacked sprinklers. Which could have helped the situation greatly. It could have ended the fire before the fire department even got there. There was also a lack of vent ducts in the opening of the roof, which would have allowed all the poisonous gas and smoke that was building up to naturally leave the building. But because of their absence, the toxic gas and smoke just continued to build up inside the building, and that's what killed the firefighters. And the fire destroyed the structure thoroughly, and the building just overall wasn't up to code. And if it were, things could have turned out so much differently. And the fire had quickly generated large amounts of flammable toxic gases, we've already mentioned already, that just filled the building, created even more fuel for the raging fire. When a group of firefighters and some of the mutual aid department were sent into the building to search for the missing firefighters, there was a highly flammable mixture of combustion byproducts created just by the soot and the upholstery that had been ignited when they let the air come in through the windows, and the showroom was just flooded with flames and increased the danger level, and eventually they had to leave those other firefighters behind. And those firefighters who had entered first were caught in this dangerous reaction, leading to injuries and deaths that could have all been prevented had they been more properly trained on all the extreme behaviors of fire, and if they had been properly trained on what causes those behaviors, and if they would have looked at the upholstery around them, the furniture store, the place where they were at, and just all the elements that surrounded them, maybe they would be alive today. And thank you for listening. That was our project.